Hello, welcome in. Thanks for being here. This is my music channel, Musicalina, and continuing on with my series of my favorite songs of each decade. Last week I did 70s, and today it's going to be all about my favorite songs of the 1980s. First song on my list is Madonna, Live to Tell, off of the 1986 album True Blue. Madonna was the queen of the 80s. I could have chosen a multitude of songs. I chose Live to Tell actually because it doesn't sound like an 80s song. Material Girl, Into the Groove, even a ballad like Crazy for You, to me all sound very distinctly of that era. But Live to Tell is different. Live to Tell kind of transcends the sound of any particular decade. I feel like that song could have been released in the 90s. It could have been released yesterday, and it would still stand on its own as a fantastic song. The Cure, Just Like Heaven from 1987. This song falls in the same category to me as Live to Tell, where it doesn't sound like an 80s song. It's pretty timeless. It could have been released, again, just like Live to Tell, in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, yesterday, and it would still feel just as fresh. It's one of the best songs of the 80s. It's one of the best songs by The Cure. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. It is instantly recognizable. It is melodic. It is beautiful to hear. It instantly puts you in a better mood. Heart and Soul by Tapow, released in 1987 as well. This is one of my favorite songs of the 80s. This was a song that I feel like didn't get as much airplay as it truly deserved, but whenever it came on, it was a wonderful treat. It's the kind of song that gets stuck in your head for days after you hear it, and it's just a great song. Kind of different from a lot of the other stuff released in the 80s. Their vocalist, Carol Decker, has an extraordinary voice. You probably forgot about that song, didn't you? Heart and Soul. Find that song. Go find it. Find it on Spotify, and I will link it below. It's worth a re-listen for sure. I had a hard time picking a Heart song. I wanted to include Heart in this because even though they were already successful in the 70s, they really exploded in the 80s. I chose If Looks Could Kill. I could have chosen a number of songs. Their self-titled album Heart was a massive success. I love If Looks Could Kill. I feel like it's like one of their most badass. Album-wise, I prefer Bad Animals, which was released in 87. So if I were to give you an album by Heart to listen to, I would say Bad Animals all the way. But I really love If Looks Could Kill. It's one of the first songs I ever heard by Heart. I discovered them in the 80s. I didn't even know that they were a band in the 70s when I discovered them. If Looks Can Kill is just a really great kick-ass 80s song. Guns N' Roses, you knew that they were going to be on here. Obviously, I had to pick a song from Appetite, and I was going back and forth between Sweet Child of Mine and Paradise City. Obviously, Welcome to the Jungle is the more iconic choice, but I love Sweet Child of Mine and I love Paradise City more. Sweet Child of Mine is the more conventional, ballady choice, but Paradise City is, I think, very unique in that it is one thing and then it morphs into another thing of that second half of the song, which is totally different from the first. I also really love the video. I love that it's just them on stage. There's no like overly ostentatious, glamorous. There's no cliche 80s video tropes. There's no strip club. There's no guys being overly made up, looking super glamorous. I love that it's just them on stage kicking ass. December, which is a ballad from the 80s girl group Expose, was released off their 87 album Exposure. I remember my uncle bought me the cassette. I really, really wanted the cassette of this album, and he was like, I think I got it for Christmas, and he was like, you know how hard it was for me to find this cassette? It's sold out everywhere. Like, remember those were the days when you actually, like, couldn't always get access to the music that you wanted. So like I said, December is a ballad, and I don't believe it was released as a single. This was always the track, though. I'll link it below. This was always the track, though, that stood out to me. I don't know. There was just something about it that I found so hypnotic, and I was just so drawn to this song, like more than any other song on the album. I did remember liking the album as a whole, but this song, and again, this is the one song, December, that I feel takes you out of that era. And I mean, it's 80s for sure, but I feel like it would work in any decade. Next up, It's Tricky, Run DMC. Released in 1986, this is one of my favorite Run DMC songs. This is one of their best. This is the song that everybody knows. I feel like even if you're not that familiar with Run DMC's catalog, you would know It's Tricky. There was a lip sync contest at my high school. I think it was junior year or senior year, and some of my friends did a performance of this song, and it was awesome. And I believe, if I remember correctly, they won second place. They lost to a guy who dressed like Tina Turner and did What's Love Got to Do with It? And last on my list is Anything Anything by Dramarama, released off their album, I can't remember the name of this album, Cinema Verite. I'm sure I said that wrong. I never listened to this album. This was the only song that I ever listened to off this album, is Anything Anything. This is a track that absolutely should have been more popular than it was. I don't understand why it was not. I've already told this story. It was a song that was featured in the movie Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, but it was not on the soundtrack. And I bought the soundtrack thinking that it would be on the soundtrack. This is before I even knew the name of the song, and it was not, and I was super bummed. And so I went to my dad, who is an encyclopedia of musical knowledge, and I said, there's this song, and I'm obsessed with it, and I think I just like gave some of the lyrics or something, and he said, oh, that's Dramarama. Oh, great, okay. I never got into them as a band as a whole. I've listened to some stuff, but I've just never really been into them. But this song, I love this song. This is a perfect pop song. So I feel like the takeaway from this list is that I've chosen songs that, although were in the 80s, transcended the decade and would fit into any other decade, I think, fairly easily. You know, most of the time when you hear a song that's from the 80s, you know it's from the 80s. Like, you hear that synth going and you're like, oh yeah. Anyway, that is my list. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Please subscribe. Please leave a comment down below and tell me what is your favorite song from the 80s, because I want to know. And I will see you guys very soon. Have a great rest of your weekend and take care.